A man often believes that his mind is a master over him, that it dictates reality, that it commands the course of his life. Yet this is a subtle deception. The mind is not a tyrant, nor is it a ruler. It is a mirror. It reflects what a man brings to it: his fears, his desires, his memories, his beliefs. It can amplify joy or magnify despair, but it cannot create independently. To understand this is to realize that power begins not in external control, nor in the suppression of thoughts, but in awareness of the reflection that the mind presents. The moment a man sees the mind as a mirror, not a master, he gains the first glimmer of freedom. The mirror can be deceptive. It does not always show truth plainly. It distorts according to what the man has allowed to accumulate within him. Past regrets, unspoken fears, unexamined assumptions, they all tint the reflection. A man may look into his mind and see torment where none exists, or see bliss where danger lurks. The reflection is not reality. It is a synthesis of what the mind believes to be reality. And because it feels intimate and personal, it is often accepted without question. Most men fail to notice that what they see is a reflection, not a decree. They react to the image rather than the world itself. The mind is capable of creating heaven in perception. A single thought, nurtured and repeated, can transform a moment of ordinary experience into profound peace. Gratitude, focus, and clarity act like lenses, refining the reflection so that joy, serenity, and insight appear even in difficult circumstances. A man who recognizes this can cultivate states of mental heaven without altering the world around him. He does not wait for fortune or external validation. He tends the mirror carefully, polishing it with awareness and deliberate thought. Conversely, the mind can craft hell with equal ease. Unchecked fear, resentment, regret, and desire can warp perception until the world itself seems unbearable. A man may live in relative safety and comfort, yet feel trapped in torment because the mirror has been clouded by repeated thoughts of dread, suspicion, and self-criticism. The devil does not need to shout. He only needs the man's mind to rehearse despair quietly, repeatedly, until it feels real. The mind is an amplifier, and what is amplified repeatedly takes root as perceived reality. What a man must understand is that the mirror cannot act alone. It cannot invent torment or bliss without materials, without the input of thought. Every day a man offers pieces of himself: memories, interpretations, beliefs, fears, hopes. The mirror reflects them with precision, showing the world through the lens of accumulated thought. If a man habitually revisits past failures, dwells on imagined slights, or anticipates catastrophe, the reflection becomes colored with suffering. If he cultivates clarity, hope, and reasoned expectation, the reflection radiates light. The mind does not choose, it reflects. The choice lies entirely with the man who feeds it. Most men fail to see this because the mirror is intimate and persistent. Thoughts arise so continuously, so naturally, that they are mistaken for truth. Anxiety is taken for reality. Desire is taken for necessity. Fear is taken for inevitability. And the mirror, ever faithful, shows the consequences of what the man believes, not necessarily what is true. The distinction is subtle but profound. The mind does not master him, but he can master how he perceives the reflection it offers. Awareness is the key that separates the prisoner from the observer. The danger lies not in the existence of these reflections, but in their unexamined acceptance. A man sees a distorted image and believes it is law. He reacts in alignment with fear or anger, assuming that the reflection is reality, and in doing so, reinforces the mirror with repeated validation. Each emotional response to the reflection strengthens the distortion, creating a feedback loop. The more he accepts the mirror unquestioningly, the more it appears as a tyrant. The more he observes and questions it, the more it becomes a tool for insight rather than a source of suffering. Observation is the first act of mastery. A man must learn to step back from the mirror and see its reflection for what it is, a presentation of thought, not an absolute truth. He must distinguish between what he believes and what is, between the interpretation of events and the events themselves. In this separation lies freedom. The mirror can continue to reflect fear, desire, or resentment, but when observed consciously, it loses the power to compel automatic action. The man becomes a witness rather than a victim. To cultivate this perspective, a man must feed the mirror deliberately. He must be mindful of what he dwells upon, what he repeats in thought, and what he allows to dominate attention. Gratitude, reason, compassion, and patience act as light upon the mirror, clarifying what is distorted and revealing opportunities for joy and insight. Conversely, indulging in resentment, obsession, or fear clouds the reflection, making the mind appear more tyrannical than it is. The man who attends to this daily learns that heaven or hell within the mind is not accidental. It is constructed moment by moment. It is also essential to recognize that the mirror can exaggerate extremes. Small worries may appear catastrophic, minor pleasures may appear monumental. The mind does not moderate. It magnifies whatever it receives with repetition and attention. A fleeting thought of fear can feel like inevitability. A moment of joy can feel like eternal bliss. Awareness allows a man to notice exaggeration and regain perspective. He sees that the mirror reflects not only what is present but what is amplified. And by controlling attention, he controls the reflection. The devil is aware of this mirror's power. He knows that subtle suggestions can be more effective than overt coercion. If he can influence thought, he can color perception. But the wise man understands that influence depends on consent. If he observes the mirror, if he questions the reflection, if he chooses what to dwell upon, the devil's whispers lose their authority. Heaven and hell exist, but not outside. They are determined by how the mind interprets the reflections it receives. Mastery begins with recognizing the mirror and learning to feed it deliberately. A man who practices this consistently gains a remarkable gift: autonomy over perception. He experiences joy without waiting for external reward, peace without eliminating difficulty, and resilience without relying on circumstance. He can enter what feels like heaven even amid struggle, or move through challenges without succumbing to internal hell. The mirror, once feared as a tyrant, becomes a guide, revealing patterns, showing distortions, and reflecting opportunity. In this way, mastery over the mind is not a suppression of thought, but a cultivation of perception. And so, a wise man knows that the mind is neither master nor tyrant. It is a faithful mirror, reflecting what is placed before it. Heaven, hell, and all the shades between are created by what a man brings to the mirror and how he interprets what he sees. To feed the mind wisely, to observe it continuously, and to distinguish reflection from reality is the first step toward freedom. The mind can no longer dominate the man once he realizes that its power is not inherent. It is borrowed from the attention, belief, and consent he gives it. The mirror shows what is present, magnified by attention and repetition, and it is up to the man to choose what he allows to define his perception. The moment he sees the mind as a reflection, not a master, he gains the first and most profound measure of true mastery. A man often believes that the state of his life is determined by what happens around him, by events, by fortune, by the behavior of others. Yet the truth is more subtle and far more powerful. Heaven and hell are not found in circumstances. They are created within the mind. Joy, peace, fear, and torment do not arrive from outside. They are born in thought, nurtured in attention, and cultivated in perception. The world may provide challenges, losses, and hardships, but it is the interpretation within the mind that transforms these events into heaven or hell. Understanding this is the beginning of true mastery over life itself. A single moment can be paradise for one man and torment for another, depending entirely on the lens through which it is perceived. Two men may endure the same trial, yet one emerges resilient, at peace, even grateful, while the other descends into despair, bitterness, or anxiety. The difference is not circumstance, but mind, the internal dialogue, the stories told silently to oneself. the emphasis placed on certain thoughts, and the neglect of others. This is what shapes the experience of heaven or hell. External reality is indifferent. The mind is the true arbiter of emotional climate. The mind has a remarkable capacity to fabricate both ecstasy and suffering. Pleasure is not merely the reception of favorable events. It is the interpretation of events in a way that nourishes the spirit. Gratitude, focus, and attention to what is present transform ordinary experiences into moments of profound satisfaction. A man walking through a simple forest, noticing the texture of leaves, the rustle of wind, the warmth of sunlight, can inhabit a heaven of perception. Conversely, the same forest, if approached with anxiety, worry, or regret, can become a place of torment, where shadows loom larger than they are, and every sound carries threat. Heaven and hell are first born in thought, and circumstance only reflects what the mind has already decided. Most men fail to realize how heavily their perception is influenced by repeated thought. Habitual attention to fear, resentment, and regret creates a self-reinforcing pattern. The mind rehearses suffering, magnifies threat, and draws attention to potential pain. In this environment, even neutral circumstances are interpreted as negative, and external blessings are ignored. Conversely, habitual attention to hope, learning, and appreciation primes the mind to notice opportunity, recognize abundance, and interpret challenges as growth. The same external world produces dramatically different experiences depending on the mental environment in which it is observed. The devil is cunning because he understands this principle. He rarely confronts a man with outright disaster. Instead, he whispers in the mind, highlighting what could go wrong, reminding of past failures, suggesting fears that may or may not be real. The mind, when untrained, rehearses these suggestions until they become real in perception. Anxiety becomes reality before any external event occurs. Regret grows into a mental torment that eclipses actual circumstance. The mind is fertile soil, and repeated attention waters either peace or suffering. A wise man observes this process. He notices how easily the mind can interpret neutral events as either blessing or threat, how perception colors experience before action even occurs. He realizes that happiness is not a reward for favorable circumstances, but a state cultivated through attention, reflection, and choice. He learns to separate perception from reality, to observe thoughts as suggestions rather than commands, and to decide which narratives he will allow to dominate his internal landscape. In doing so, he creates a personal heaven even amid challenge, and he shields himself from unnecessary hell, understanding that heaven and hell are internal states. Changes the way a man approaches life. Instead of seeking happiness in external events, he invests in the cultivation of mind. He nurtures thoughts that promote clarity, strength, and peace. He questions those that stir fear, bitterness, or despair. He observes the mind's tendencies to exaggerate, to distort, to anticipate catastrophe, and refuses to accept these reflections unexamined. He discovers that the power to endure difficulty, to appreciate abundance, and to experience joy lies not in external circumstance, but in deliberate interpretation. Even suffering becomes a tool when understood in this way. Pain, loss, disappointment, these do not automatically create hell. The mind has the ability to transform suffering into insight, humility, and resilience. A man who observes his internal responses can choose to learn from adversity, to extract lessons, to grow stronger. In doing so, he experiences a form of heaven, even as he navigates challenge. Conversely, a man who reacts unconsciously, allowing fear, anger, and resentment to dominate thought, experiences hell even when circumstances are mild. Heaven and hell are internal mirrors of attention, and the mind holds the brush. The subtlety of this principle is what makes it so powerful and so often ignored. Most men assume that happiness, peace, or torment is imposed from without. They chase circumstances, possessions, or approval, hoping to manufacture a state of heaven. Yet the mind's interpretation of any of these things is what ultimately matters. A man can possess wealth and comfort and still live in torment if his mind is poisoned by fear or dissatisfaction. Conversely, a man can endure loss, limitation, and struggle, yet inhabit a mind so disciplined and observant that he experiences joy, serenity, and clarity. Heaven and hell are reflections, not mandates. This understanding also frees a man from blame and resentment. When he realizes that torment is created within, he sees that no external circumstance has power over him without his consent. He is no longer a victim of circumstance or the actions of others. The mind is sovereign in shaping perception, and within this sovereignty lies freedom. The man who understands this stops blaming the world, stops seeking validation, and begins to cultivate internal states deliberately. He becomes the architect of his own heaven and the guardian against his own hell. Observation is the key. A man must notice the patterns of thought that create suffering, recognize the ways in which attention magnifies fear or regret, and redirect focus toward clarity, presence, and constructive interpretation. This is not a one-time act, it is a continuous discipline. Each day, each moment, each thought presents a choice to reinforce torment or to cultivate peace. The wise man sees these opportunities as sacred, for they are the building blocks of heaven within the mind. The man who masters this principle also masters resilience. Life will inevitably present challenges, losses, and fears, yet a mind trained in deliberate observation and interpretation is not crushed by circumstance. Difficulty becomes temporary, challenge becomes training, and opportunity for insight arises even in hardship. Hell may exist in the mind, but it is no longer inevitable. Heaven, likewise, is accessible at any moment, regardless of external events. The mind is the forge and the man's attention is the hammer shaping the metal of experience. And so, a wise man understands that heaven and hell are not external destinations, nor are they rewards or punishments imposed by the world. They are states of mind, reflections of attention, and interpretations of circumstance. The power to experience peace or torment, joy or suffering, lies entirely in the cultivation of perception. Every thought chosen, every narrative questioned, every reflection observed becomes a stone in the construction of internal heaven, or a weight in the creation of internal hell. The world does not command how a man feels, the mind does. And the mind, when trained to observe, to question, and to interpret with clarity, transforms existence itself. Heaven and hell exist not in distant realms or external circumstances, but in the space between thought and attention, in the choice a man makes and how he perceives his life. Understanding this, the wise man sees clearly where true power begins and where freedom can be found. A man rarely understands the tremendous power of his own thoughts. He believes that identity is shaped by what he does, by what he possesses, or by what the world imposes upon him. Yet the truth is far subtler, far more profound. Thoughts are the architects of identity, and identity is the blueprint for destiny. Every belief a man entertains, every narrative he repeats to himself, every interpretation he allows to dominate perception, quietly constructs the man he will become. The mind is the foundation, and thought is the brick and mortar of all character, all action, and ultimately all outcomes in life. The danger is that most men underestimate the cumulative force of thought. A fleeting worry, a passing doubt, a minor indulgence in fear may seem insignificant in the moment. Yet when repeated, these small seeds grow into powerful habits. Habits solidify into patterns. Patterns shape behavior. And behavior, once consistent, forms identity. A man may look at the world and wonder why he feels weak, unfulfilled, or powerless, when the truth is that his own mind, through countless small and unnoticed repetitions, has been silently shaping the path he now walks. Consider how easily identity can be constructed without awareness. A man begins to think, "I am not strong enough," or "I am not worthy." At first it is a subtle whisper, a private thought. He dismisses it perhaps, or treats it lightly. But the mind, patient and persistent, repeats it, rehearses it, and interprets every circumstance through its lens. A minor setback becomes proof of weakness. A moment of hesitation becomes evidence of incapability. Before long, the man is not simply thinking the thought, he is living it, embodying it, defining himself by it. The mind, through repeated thought, has quietly rewritten identity. The mind works the same way in constructing positive identity. Thoughts of courage, resilience, and competence, when nurtured and repeated, grow into habits of action. Repeatedly seeing oneself as capable strengthens perception, builds confidence, and directs attention toward opportunities rather than obstacles. A man who dwells on mastery begins to act with mastery, and the external world responds in alignment with that internal state. What is imagined, believed, and rehearsed in thought becomes tangible in behavior, achievement, and interaction. Thought is the hidden hand shaping the trajectory of life long before action manifests. The devil, if he is to influence a man, does not usually confront him overtly. He does not strike from outside. He works through the subtle manipulation of thought. Every suggestion of doubt, every whisper of fear, every interpretation of past failure is offered as if reasonable, logical, or inevitable. And the unobservant mind accepts them repeatedly, allowing these suggestions to dictate how challenges are approached, how opportunities are evaluated, and how relationships are navigated. Before the man even encounters a real obstacle, the internal blueprint has already determined his response. The mind is the silent stage manager of destiny, setting the scene before life even begins to unfold. A wise man, however, recognizes that thought is neither enemy nor friend until examined. Each thought is a suggestion, a possibility, not a command. By observing thoughts, questioning their validity, and choosing which to dwell upon, a man gains the power to shape identity deliberately. The process is continuous. Every repeated thought either strengthens a limiting self-concept or reinforces a constructive one. Every moment of attention, therefore, is an act of creation. A mind left unchecked builds patterns unconsciously. A mind observed and directed builds character intentionally. Identity formed in thought influences not only action but also perception. Two men may encounter the same circumstance, yet their internalized beliefs will determine how they interpret it. One sees opportunity, another sees threat. One experiences failure as feedback, another interprets it as proof of incapability. One acts decisively, another hesitates. The difference is not external, it is internal, sculpted long before the event by repeated thought patterns and reinforced beliefs. Destiny, it turns out, is not merely what happens. It is what the mind has already prepared a man to make of what happens. The mind has a remarkable ability to rationalize and justify identity. Thoughts that reinforce weakness are presented as practicality, prudence, or realism. Thoughts that reinforce courage are presented as possibility, foresight, or intuition. Without awareness, a man may believe he is acting freely, yet he is often following the internal script, quietly written by repeated thoughts over time. This is why mastery of thought is indispensable. To shape identity intentionally, a man must observe what he is telling himself, discern which narratives serve him, and discard those that do not. Habits emerge naturally from repeated thought. A man who rehearses anger or resentment becomes quick to anger and slow to forgive. A man who rehearses doubt and fear becomes hesitant and insecure. Conversely, a man who rehearses patience, clarity, and courage becomes resilient, decisive, and calm under pressure. The mind is a sculptor, and every thought is a stroke of the chisel. Identity is not something discovered externally. It is built internally through disciplined attention and repeated reflection. Even memory is shaped by thought. What a man recalls, how he interprets past events, and which moments he emphasizes influence current beliefs about himself. Dwelling on past mistakes reinforces inadequacy. Reflecting on past resilience strengthens confidence. The mind rewrites history through repeated attention, and identity is continuously reconstructed. The man who observes this process learns to choose which memories to honor, which lessons to carry forward, and which distortions to release. In this way, Thought becomes the architect not only of identity, but of interpretation, perception, and ultimately experience. A wise man recognizes that identity is never fixed. Thoughts may have created certain habits, fears, or limitations, but repeated conscious thought can reshape them. The mind is malleable. By deliberately selecting which beliefs to strengthen, a man can reconstruct his sense of self over time. This requires patience, vigilance, and daily attention. Each thought examined, each narrative challenged, each habit refined is an act of creation. Identity, once passive and unconsciously formed, becomes active and deliberately constructed. The consequences of unexamined thought are cumulative. One unchallenged belief may seem trivial, but over days, months, and years, it grows into behavior that defines choices, relationships, and achievements. One moment of unchecked fear may seem insignificant, yet repeated daily it molds hesitation into habit and doubt into identity. A man may wonder why he feels limited, why he struggles to act, why life seems to constrain him, when the truth is that the blueprint was drawn quietly in his own mind long before he realized it. Mastery of thought, then, is mastery of self. By observing the mind, questioning repeated narratives, and choosing which beliefs to reinforce, a man gains agency over identity, and, through identity, over destiny. Thought ceases to be a passive force dictating the course of life, and becomes a tool for creation. Each conscious decision about which thoughts to dwell upon is an act of building character, shaping perception, and determining response. The mind, when directed with clarity, transforms from a source of unconscious limitation into an instrument of empowerment. The ultimate insight is simple, yet profound. The world cannot dictate identity, only the mind can, and the mind, in turn, can only dictate identity to the extent that a man allows it. Observation, reflection, and deliberate attention are the keys to mastery. The thoughts he entertains daily, the beliefs he repeats, the narratives he allows to dominate perception, these construct the architecture of who he is. Every action, every decision, every achievement, and every failure is filtered through this internal blueprint. The power lies not in circumstance, but in the deliberate cultivation of thought. A man who understands this sees clearly that his greatest responsibility is toward his own mind. By shaping thought, he shapes identity. By shaping identity, he shapes behavior. By shaping behavior, he shapes destiny. And in this awareness, he discovers that mastery is not found in external conquest, but in the deliberate construction of self, built brick by brick through repeated, examined, and intentional thought. The moment a man begins to observe and guide his thoughts, he steps into sovereignty over himself. The mind, once a passive force that unconsciously determined identity, becomes a tool for deliberate creation. The patterns of belief that once dictated response and shaped destiny are now observed, challenged, and refined. Identity is no longer a prisoner of habit or fear. It becomes a conscious expression of intention. And when a man realizes that thought is the foundation of identity, he understands where true power begins and where destiny is truly shaped. A man rarely recognizes how quietly destruction can take root within his own mind. He expects danger to arrive in bold forms, screaming voices, sudden threats, dramatic confrontations. But the greatest peril often comes disguised in subtlety. The patterns of self-sabotage, fear, and doubt rarely announce themselves with clarity. They arrive as whispers, suggestions, fleeting impulses that feel reasonable, even intelligent. The mind is a fertile soil, and these subtle seeds, if unnoticed, grow into weeds that choke potential, distort perception, and erode strength. The devil does not strike with force. He works through the unexamined mind, planting suggestions so small, so gentle, that a man hardly notices until the consequences are already evident. The subtlety of destructive thought makes it all the more dangerous. A man may begin by entertaining a small doubt, questioning a decision, or hesitating in the face of discomfort. At first it seems minor, perhaps even harmless, The mind whispers, "Perhaps you should wait," or "This may not be the right time," or "Why take the risk?" Each suggestion feels reasonable because the mind has been trained to rationalize hesitation, doubt, and avoidance. The whisper is not recognized as an enemy, it is accepted as intelligence. Yet repetition is its weapon. The small, subtle voice, attended to repeatedly, grows louder over time, influencing perception, shaping choices, and quietly dictating behavior. The patterns of subtle self-destruction are often cloaked in logic. A man convinces himself that avoidance is prudent, that delay is necessary, that fear is wisdom. Every rationalization, no matter how mild, is a thread in a larger web that binds the will. The mind, left unchecked, amplifies these threads until they become chains, restraining action, eroding confidence, and distorting judgment. The danger is that these subtle forces are rarely dramatic, rarely spectacular. They appear as reasoned thought, careful planning, or necessary caution, and because they feel intelligent, they are seldom questioned. Observation is essential. A man must learn to notice these subtle suggestions before they harden into habit. He must recognize the difference between intelligence and rationalization, between necessary caution and fear masquerading as prudence. The whisper of the mind may suggest avoidance, indulgence, or surrender, and it will do so in tones that feel familiar and convincing. To resist, a man must cultivate awareness, watching the patterns that arise, noting when repeated thoughts lead to hesitation or compromise. Say, and choosing deliberately whether to act or defer. Subtlety is also what makes the devil's influence so pervasive. He does not need to confront a man openly, he only needs the mind to cooperate. When a man entertains small doubts, tolerates minor fears, or allows fleeting distractions to dominate attention, he is effectively opening the door to unseen forces. These suggestions accumulate like drops of water eroding stone, imperceptibly at first, yet relentlessly over time. The cumulative effect can be devastating, for by the time the consequences become visible, the patterns have already been deeply established. This is why many men do not recognize the origin of their difficulties. They see failure, hesitation, or indecision, and assume it is caused by external circumstances or the actions of others. They do not realize that the subtle seeds were planted long before the external event appeared. Within the quiet spaces of thought, the mind, if unobserved, rehearses every doubt, every fear, every rationalization, shaping the man's response before the challenge even arrives. The battle is internal, and the danger is most severe when it is least visible. Subtle suggestions are also dangerous because they exploit human comfort. The mind seeks ease, avoiding friction, discomfort, and effort whenever possible. This tendency is natural, but it can be manipulated. The devil's whispers arrive cloaked as reasoned desire for comfort. Rest a little longer. Why challenge yourself today? It's only temporary. Each suggestion aligns with the mind's natural inclinations, making it difficult to distinguish between intelligent choice and surrender. The subtlety lies in how these small concessions accumulate into a life shaped more by avoidance than by purpose. The wise man, however, recognizes that subtlety does not diminish danger. He knows that a single, unattended thought, repeated often, can grow into an internal script that dictates action. He understands that small compromises, when allowed to pass unchecked, establish patterns that harden into habit and habit into identity. Therefore, he observes the mind continuously, noting the rise of hesitation, doubt, or rationalization, and evaluates each against purpose, intention, and long-term vision. He distinguishes between temporary need and permanent surrender, between practical caution and fear disguised as prudence. The power of subtlety also lies in invisibility. Men often resist overt threats. They prepare for challenges that are obvious, but the quiet suggestions, the repeated whispers of doubt or fear, are nearly impossible to resist without awareness. They integrate seamlessly into daily thought unnoticed, like tiny currents beneath the surface of a river. A man may believe he is acting freely, making deliberate decisions, yet the subtle influences have already set the trajectory. By the time he recognizes the effect, it appears as if life itself has imposed limits at ion, rather than his own mind. To counter this, a man must cultivate vigilance and patience. He cannot hope to notice every subtle suggestion in a single effort, nor eliminate them instantly. Observation is a lifelong discipline. He must regularly examine the recurring thoughts that shape his perception, recognize the patterns of hesitation or indulgence, and respond deliberately rather than reflexively. In this way, subtlety, once the weapon of weakness, becomes an opportunity for mastery, as the man learns to discern, redirect, and refine his internal dialogue. The mind, when observed carefully, reveals the difference between guidance and sabotage. Every suggestion, every hesitation, every rationalization can be evaluated. Does it serve growth, clarity, and purpose, or does it feed fear, avoidance, and stagnation? The whisper that once seemed intelligent may be recognized as deception. The fleeting urge to surrender may be understood as the mind's attempt to preserve comfort at the expense of potential. In recognizing these subtleties, a man takes control of the internal battlefield, preventing small suggestions from growing into chains. Subtle patterns also shape perception in ways that are nearly imperceptible. A man who allows small doubts and fears to dominate his attention begins to perceive challenges as larger, obstacles as more threatening, and risks as more dangerous than they truly are. Small indulgences and hesitation magnify every difficulty, and the mind's exaggerations distort reality. Conversely, by observing and challenging subtle suggestions, a man begins to perceive clearly, to evaluate risks realistically, and to respond with calm, deliberate intention. The mind, once a vehicle for deception, becomes a mirror for clarity. The danger of subtlety is not only in what is suggested but in what is ignored. When a man fails to notice a whisper, a hesitation, or a fleeting impulse, he silently consents. Each unexamined thought is a small surrender. Each ignored suggestion reinforces a pathway of weakness. And the accumulation of these small, subtle surrenders creates patterns that eventually dominate behavior, habits, and identity. Mastery requires attention to the minute, the nearly invisible, and the often overlooked. A wise man knows that the devil's strategy relies on patience and subtlety. By observing these processes, by questioning each small suggestion, and by refusing automatic obedience to fleeting impulses, he neutralizes the greatest internal threat. He does not fight the mind with force, nor does he attempt to suppress thought entirely. He cultivates discernment. He distinguishes guidance from sabotage. He recognizes the power of repeated suggestion and deliberately chooses which to nurture and which to dismiss. Ultimately, subtlety teaches a profound lesson. The greatest dangers are often those that appear harmless. What feels reasonable, convenient, or familiar can, over time, accumulate into chains that bind. The will, a whisper repeated daily, has more power than a shout. A quiet suggestion, left unexamined, can dictate choices, shape identity, and determine destiny. The wise man observes, discerns, and chooses consciously, turning subtlety from a weapon into a tool for clarity, growth, and mastery. And when a man cultivates this discipline, he discovers the quiet truth. The mind, once feared as a host of subtle threats, becomes the arena of conscious creation, and the whispers that once deceived him become guides toward clarity and strength. A man often believes that mastery comes from silencing the mind, from suppressing thoughts, or from denying impulses. He imagines that if he can simply control what arises within, if he can shut out fear, desire, or doubt, he will achieve freedom. Yet true mastery does not lie in suppression, it lies in observation. The mind cannot be silenced, it cannot be forced into stillness by will alone, but it can be witnessed, and in that witnessing lies the power to act deliberately. To watch the mind is not weakness, it is strength. To observe thoughts without immediate reaction is not passivity, it is sovereignty. Observation begins with awareness. A man must notice his thoughts as they arise, without judgment, without immediate obedience. Every fleeting impulse, every suggestion, every surge of desire or fear is presented to the mind like a visitor knocking at the door. The wise man does not open the door without consideration. He acknowledges the presence of the thought, listens to its suggestion, and then chooses how to respond. The difference between reaction and observation is subtle but profound. Reaction grants the mind authority it does not deserve. Observation reclaims authority for the self. The mind, if left unchecked, acts like a river that cannot be dammed. Thoughts flow continuously, sometimes turbulent, sometimes calm, sometimes deceptively gentle. To attempt to suppress this flow is to fight the current, to expend energy in a battle destined to fail. Yet when a man observes, he does not fight the flow. He positions himself on the bank, sees each current, and chooses which to follow and which to let pass. In this way, the mind ceases to be a tyrant and becomes a partner in deliberate action. Observation allows a man to distinguish between thoughts that serve purpose and thoughts that undermine it. The mind produces endless suggestions, and not all of them are helpful. Fear may arise before a challenge, doubt may appear before a decision, and desire may emerge in excess or distraction. Each suggestion is neutral until evaluated. By observing, a man gains the clarity to discern which thoughts merit attention and which are distractions. This discernment is the foundation of freedom, for no man is free whose mind dictates action without his conscious consent. The power of observation is cumulative. At first, a man may notice a single thought, a moment of doubt, or a fleeting desire. He may practice pow, sing before acting, asking himself whether the impulse aligns with purpose or serves only habit, fear, or indulgence. Over time, this practice strengthens, and the mind becomes increasingly transparent. Patterns that once operated unconsciously are revealed. Impulses are noticed before they become action. Decisions are measured before they are made. Observation transforms the mind from a source of unexamined influence into a tool of deliberate creation. Observation also cultivates patience. The mind desires instant response, immediate satisfaction, and swift outcomes. Without observation, a man is carried by this impatience, reacting impulsively, succumbing to short-term comfort, or yielding to fear before understanding. When observation is practiced, the mind is no longer granted automatic authority. The man learns to wait, to examine, to consider the implications of a thought before allowing it to influence action. In this space between impulse and response, true power emerges. Patience becomes not a passive endurance, but an active strategy, a means of aligning action with purpose. The devil, if he seeks to influence a man, works through unobserved thought, subtle doubts, fleeting fears, quiet justifications. These are the tools of subtle manipulation. A mind that is observed carefully, however, becomes resistant to such influence. The man does not deny the presence of fear or desire. He recognizes it, evaluates it, and decides whether it deserves action. He does not react automatically to whispers of temptation, nor does he allow the rehearsal of doubt to dictate behavior. Observation creates a gap between suggestion and action, and in that gap, freedom and mastery are born. A man who observes the mind continuously also gains insight into patterns that were previously invisible. Repeated thoughts, habitual fears, and common justifications all become visible under careful scrutiny. The moment these patterns are recognized, they lose their unconscious power. What once seemed inevitable, the hesitation, the avoidance, the internal surrender, becomes optional. The man realizes that he has always had a choice. He simply lacked the awareness to exercise it. Observation illuminates the mechanisms of influence, allowing conscious intervention before they manifest in action. Observation is not a passive act, it is deliberate engagement. A man watches thoughts not merely to notice them, but to understand them, to interpret them, and to align them with higher purpose. Each thought examined becomes an opportunity to reinforce values, to strengthen character, and to cultivate clarity. Each impulse resisted through observation becomes a step toward sovereignty. Observation is the laboratory in which the mind is tested, refined, and transformed. Without it, the mind operates unchecked, and the man is carried wherever patterns of habit, fear, or desire direct him. Furthermore, observation cultivates emotional resilience. A man who sees the mind's suggestions clearly is less likely to be overwhelmed by them. Fear may arise, but it is noticed rather than reacted to. Desire may surge, but it is observed rather than obeyed. Anger, impatience, or frustration may appear, but they are recognized as passing phenomena, not absolute truths. This clarity creates stability, for the man is no longer tossed about by every passing impulse. Observation allows him to respond with discernment, to act with intention, and to maintain composure even amid turmoil. Observation also fosters clarity of values. The mind produces endless impulses, some aligned with purpose, some opposed. Without scrutiny, a man may follow impulses that undermine long-term goals, gratify short-term desire, or reinforce habits of weakness. By observing, he identifies which impulses reflect his true intentions, which align with the man he aspires to be, and which are distractions from meaningful pursuit. Over time, the clarity gained from observation ensures that action is consistent with principle, and that identity is shaped by deliberate choice rather than unexamined habit. The practice of observation must be consistent. It is not enough to notice occasionally or react reflexively. Mastery requires ongoing awareness. Each day, each moment, each thought is an opportunity to exercise observation. Small failures of attention are inevitable, but they are instructive. The man notices where patterns of unexamined thought appear. He understands their consequences, and he recommits to the practice. Observation is both a shield and a tool, a shield against unconscious surrender, and a tool for building intentional, deliberate action. Ultimately, observation transforms the relationship a man has with his mind. What once seemed uncontrollable, overwhelming, or deceptive becomes transparent and manageable. Thoughts and impulses continue to arise, but they are no longer tyrants. They are visitors. The man listens, discerns, and acts deliberately. Freedom is not found in the absence of thought, nor in the suppression of desire, nor in the silencing of fear. It is found in the clear observation of the mind and the deliberate choice of which influences to accept, which to redirect, and which to release. A man who practices observation consistently discovers a profound truth. Mastery is not forceful. It is attentive. It is not coercive. It is discerning. It is not the denial of impulses, but the conscious choice to engage with them. The mind, once a source of unconscious influence, becomes a mirror of clarity and a tool for intentional action. The whispers of fear, desire, and doubt lose authority when they are witnessed and measured. And in this discipline, the man becomes sovereign, for the power of observation is the power to act deliberately, to shape destiny, and to live aligned with purpose. And so, a wise man understands that mastery of the mind does not require suppression of thought or denial of impulse. It requires the vigilant practice of observer, the cultivation of discernment, and the deliberate engagement with every suggestion the mind produces. Through observation, the man transforms the mind from a potential tyrant into an instrument of clarity, strength, and intentional action. A man often looks to the world for guidance, for answers, for signs of what is right or wrong, what is safe or dangerous, what is possible or impossible. Yet the most profound landscapes of experience, the heavens, the hells, and the vast space in between, are not found outside. They are created within the mind, shaped by the choices he makes and how he thinks, reacts, and interprets life. The spectrum of mental states is vast, stretching from despair to ecstasy, from torment to serenity, and the bridge between these extremes is constructed moment by moment through deliberate decision. Awareness of this truth is the key to navigating the internal world with mastery. The mind is not a fixed realm. It is fluid, responsive, and highly malleable. Every thought, every interpretation, every judgment colors perception. A single moment of focus, repeated often, can tilt the scales toward peace, clarity, and purpose, while repeated indulgence in fear, resentment, or indulgence can tip the mind into turmoil. It is in these small, continuous choices that the spectrum between heaven and hell is negotiated. One man may experience a crisis as an opportunity for growth, learning, or resilience, while another sees it as irredeemable suffering. The difference is not circumstance, it is choice. Choice in the mind is subtle yet relentless. A man does not always realize that every interpretation, every mental reaction, is an act of creation. Thoughts that are entertained, repeated, and nurtured become habits, and habits shape identity. The narratives a man allows to dominate his thinking dictate perception, influence behavior, and establish the foundation upon which life experiences are built. To inhabit a state of heaven within, a man must choose which thoughts to attend to, which interpretations to embrace, and which narratives to reject. Conversely, to fall into internal hell is also a choice made through unconscious consent, through repeated acceptance of fear, doubt, and resentment. The mind offers countless suggestions at every moment, and it is the response to these suggestions that determines experience. Fear arises before a challenge, urging caution. Desire surges, promising pleasure. Doubt whispers, questioning capability. Regret lingers, demanding attention. The wise man notices these currents but does not surrender to them unthinkingly. He evaluates each thought, each impulse, against purpose and long-term intention. Some suggestions serve growth, some serve decay. The space between stimulus and response becomes the arena of choice, the theater in which heaven, hell, or the neutral states between are crafted. Most men fail to recognize this because they live unconsciously, reacting to the mind's suggestions as if they were commands. Impulses are obeyed without question, emotions are allowed to dominate without reflection, and the narratives of fear, anger, and desire are reinforced repeatedly until they feel inevitable. The bridge between torment and peace remains hidden because the man is unaware of its construction, yet it exists. It is composed entirely of conscious choices, deliberate attention, and sustained observation. With awareness, a man can navigate this spectrum deliberately, rather than being carried by unconscious currents. The spectrum of mental states is not simply dualistic. Heaven and hell exist as extremes, but most experience falls somewhere in between. Contentment, doubt, peace, frustration, hope, anxiety, these are all shades along the continuum. The mind moves fluidly among them, and the man's choices act as rudders, guiding direction. By cultivating attention, observing thoughts, and evaluating impulses, he can steer gradually toward clarity, balance, and serenity. The subtlety of these choices is remarkable. One repeated thought, one reframed perception, one deliberate action can shift the mind's orientation over time, pulling experience closer to heaven or allowing it to drift toward torment. Choice also shapes resilience. Life presents challenges, losses, betrayals, and uncertainty. The external world may be indifferent or harsh, but how the mind interprets these events is what determines the internal experience. One man may meet failure and experience despair, seeing it as evidence of inadequacy. Another may meet the same failure and experience insight, growth, and renewed determination. Both experience the same external reality, yet the internal landscapes differ profoundly. Choice, the deliberate shaping of interpretation and response, creates this divergence. The mind, through repeated decisions, constructs the internal world in which a man lives. Even subtle choices accumulate to define the architecture of internal life. A fleeting decision to indulge worry rather than observe it, a moment of judgment rather than understanding, a choice to linger in resentment rather than release it, all contribute to the shape of experience. Heaven and hell are not sudden arrivals, they are the sum of countless small decisions, the culmination of repeated choices over time. A man who understands this recognizes the tremendous responsibility he bears in shaping his internal reality, and he approaches thought, attention, and interpretation with deliberate care. Awareness of this continuum also fosters humility and vigilance. The mind is powerful, and its influence is subtle. Small lapses in attention, minor indulgences in fear or desire, can tip perception gradually toward torment. Conversely, sustained mindfulness, deliberate reflection, and conscious attention can cultivate peace and clarity. The wise man does not expect perfection. He expects vigilance. He understands that the spectrum between heaven and hell is dynamic, shifting with each decision, and that mastery is not about controlling circumstance, but about stewarding perception. The freedom found in recognizing choice is profound. A man no longer needs to blame circumstance, fortune, or others for internal torment. He sees clearly that the spectrum of experience is shaped primarily by his own mind, by the patterns of thought he cultivates, by the narratives he chooses to rehearse or reject. Responsibility, when understood in this way, is empowering. It places the capacity for heaven, the escape from hell, and the navigation of all shades in between firmly in the hands of the individual. The mind becomes a tool of creation, and the man, once passive, becomes the architect of his internal world. This perspective also illuminates the nature of discipline. Deliberate attention, thoughtful reflection, and the repeated exercise of choice are not burdensome rules. They are the methods by which the mind is shaped. A man cannot control what arises in thought, but he can control how he responds. Each decision, each observed impulse, each consciously attended thought contributes to the construction of internal reality. Over time, these choices compound, producing clarity, strength, and serenity, or confusion, weakness, and torment. The bridge between heaven and hell is built one choice at a time, and the man who attends to this process gains sovereignty over his own experience. The spectrum between heaven and hell also reveals the impermanence of all mental states. Joy and despair, contentment and frustration, hope and anxiety, they all arise, persist for a time, and pass. This impermanence is liberating for the man who observes, because it demonstrates that even torment is temporary and even bliss is fragile. By recognizing the transient nature of experience, he is less likely to surrender unthinkingly to extremes. He uses observation and deliberate choice to navigate the continuum with equanimity, responding appropriately to what arises rather than being carried helplessly by its tide. Choice, observation, and awareness together allow a man to occupy the space between extremes with grace and clarity. He recognizes when the mind tilts toward torment and gently redirects attention toward clarity. He notices impulses toward indulgence or avoidance and chooses response aligned with purpose. He cultivates gratitude, reason, and presence, strengthening internal equilibrium. In this way, the man is neither enslaved by hell nor dependent on heaven. He navigates the full spectrum of experience with conscious intention, transforming the mind into a landscape shaped by discernment rather than accident. Ultimately, the spectrum between heaven and hell is defined by the decisions a man makes moment by moment. It is constructed from awareness, observation, and deliberate attention. Every thought attended to, every impulse examined, every narrative chosen or discarded contributes to the internal landscape he inhabits. Heaven, hell, and the vast expanse between are not imposed externally, they are created internally, shaped by the cumulative effect of choice. The power to inhabit peace, to endure suffering, to cultivate clarity, and to navigate uncertainty rests entirely within the exercise of conscious decision. And so, a wise man knows that the full range of mental experience, from bliss to despair, serenity to torment, heaven to hell, is determined not by circumstance, but by the choices he makes in thought, perception, and interpretation. Each decision shapes the bridge between extremes. Each moment of awareness reinforces sovereignty, and each deliberate act of attention constructs the internal world he inhabits. The spectrum is vast, But mastery begins with the simple, profound act of choosing consciously in the mind.